What's up, everyone? Welcome back to, you guessed it, another episode of Fix It Again. We have our victim right here behind us. This is a 48RE that a customer of mine picked up. I'm pretty sure that he got this one secondhand, and so if it is the one that I believe that I think it is, then this one would have been built back in 2019. So this one is quite old. I don't know exactly the mileage and the history of it, because I know that if it is the one I'm thinking that it is, it has been resold at least once, but it doesn't matter. Current customer sent it in to get refreshed. So let's bust this baby apart and let's see what I've learned between 2019 and 2025 and what this thing needs to be up to today's golden standard. Overdrive section is off to take our first little peek here, and our overdrive brake clutches look beautiful. These are what's called a black Alto. I know they look kind of like a brownish red color, but Alto calls them a black material. And from time to time, I do still use these sometimes when you can't get the GPZs. And in my opinion, these are completely equivalent to a GPZ for the overdrive brakes. And as you can see here, these look wonderful. These are absolutely don't need to be replaced. Perfectly fine. So I will put this stack up back together. This is a 6-clutch stack up. Typically nowadays on all of my higher than 1,000 horsepower builds, I would do a 7-clutch stack up. But this is still a standard size input shaft. So this would be like a 1,000 horsepower style build. So I'm going to leave these alone. Obviously they're living right, and don't fix what's not broken sometimes. Overdrive direct clutches. These are applied with the 800-pound spring, and they should always look just as good as these do. So we know our overdrive spacing is correct. Everything is nice and happy. So we are good to go in the overdrive section. Let's talk a little shaft identification here. So this is a TCS Canada intermediate shaft. I still do use these from time to time. Every now and then you run into the Sonex ones being on back order, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with the TCS Canada shafts. I actually think they're a great shaft too. I prefer my Sonex stuff a little bit, but it's a great shaft. Yeah, this is a 29 spline billet output, which is also a TCS Canada. And the way you can tell is the TCS Canada ones will be fully splined all the way to the bottom, and then it'll kind of start to taper out. And if you shine your light into an overdrive housing, you can actually look in there and kind of see this. As to where the Sonex ones, the splines just kind of end, it steps down, and then it's a lot less abrupt taper like this one is. Again, for the output shaft, I think the TCS stuff is fine. Still prefer my Sonex stuff a little bit, but totally fine. And the Sonex intermediate, the way you can tell the difference between a Sonex and TCS, you can see how it's stepped down there between the bushing area. That's a pretty good indication that that is a Sonex shaft. So, little tech tips. If you guys are building your own transmissions, or you're looking at buying a used one, or whatever the case may be, and you want to know a little bit of difference between how to identify the intermediate and the output shaft. So we got our pump out here, and I found our first sign of something wrong. First off, these plugs, I always right stuff these plugs up, so that way you don't have what happened here, where the plug can actually fall out. So when one of these things does fall out like this, you can't just shove it back in there and restake it and then fill it up with the right stuff. You really need to replace all these plugs. So I'm going to continue going through and knocking these out and replace these. And then once they're replaced, I like to put a little dab of right stuff over each one and kind of smooth it out. And so that way, once it's in the transmission case here, it encapsulates these and they can never ever blow out. This one that was loose in here was torque converter, lockup, clutch, apply, and then that's lockup, release, and then the forward and the directs. So if these are loose, you're going to have a pressure loss in those areas. So this is going to make lockup not apply properly if this thing is loose. So we'll go through and get that fixed up, and before I install it, I'll right stuff this, and we won't have that problem again. While we're on the subject of pumps, let's talk a little bit about some things that you guys need to look for in pumps. You can see it's extremely light, but there's very, very minute little amount of what I would just call like a surface scarring on this pump. It's nothing that, in my opinion, is going to junk this pump body. It's still going to build pressure perfectly fine because I can't catch any of this with my fingernail at all. It's just a little bit not quite as brand new looking as what they can look like. And you'll kind of see the same thing correlate over here to the gear. Perfectly smooth, can't catch any of this with your finger, so it's going to be fine, but they do sometimes look better than this. The biggest thing that causes this, when it looks like this, is this has probably been ran low on fluid at one point in its life. Even just a couple quarts of fluid, not very much run time on them, can scar this up, because there is absolutely nothing in here. There's no bearing, there's no bushing between the gear pocket and the gear itself that lubricates it. The only thing that lubricates it is oil. And if these things have been ran low on oil, sometimes if you run them low enough, it'll actually just completely junk all this. So my guess is at some point along the way, this thing's probably been a little bit low on oil. The other thing that can cause this is converter ballooning. Very unlikely that is what's going on here. I can explain that why here in a minute. But typically when converter ballooning happens, this gear will really get into this pretty badly. Converter ballooning can most commonly be found on the stator support here. Now this stator support is not the prettiest. I'm actually going to change this out. You can put this on a lathe and carefully resurface this or a CNC mill, but I'm just going to change it out for another good known one I have here, because I can just ever so slightly catch the edge of this where this has been riding. So we will check for and make sure converter ballooning wasn't something that's going on here. The reason that I tell you I highly doubt it was is because we run this converter sealing ring on these apply regulated lockup setups, and what that does is that allows us to regulate the lockup apply pressure down to 180 psi in the valve body. So basically it doesn't matter, we can have our main line pressure at 200, 210 psi, but lockup pressure is never going to see more than 180, and high lockup pressure is what causes converter ballooning. Now there's some other stuff that can do it too, extreme heat, things of that nature, but so far I haven't found any signs of any extreme heat or anything like that. So this has most likely happened at some point in this transmission's life due to being a little bit low on fluid. So I'm going to continue tearing this thing down and see what else we come up with. Speaking of apply regulated lockup, this is how we know this one is. This boost valve here has this spring here. Now remember, this is a gear-in only thing, and this is a dealer only thing. So if you guys have a gear-in valve body and you want to know if it's apply regulated lockup or not, if you pull the valve body out of it, or if you just have the valve body on a bench, or whatever the case may be, if it has that spring in the boost valve here, then you know that it is apply regulated. If this is just solid and no spring, it is not apply regulated. So if it's not apply regulated, make sure that you leave the seal off of the stator support if you have a 48. You only run that if you have apply regulated lockup. And yours might say AR still, and that is what the AR stands for. Take a look at our second gear band here. This thing looks absolutely wonderful. Oops, looks brand new. The direct drum looks new. Everything is nice and happy with second gear. Take a peek at our direct clutches here. These suckers look absolutely wonderful. Clutches look brand new. You can see that the steels were wearing in a little bit. Very common. Everything looks great in that. Absolutely no reason to change anything there. So we know we got a good 2-3 shift timing, and everything is super, super happy. Now on the subject of shaft identification, I have done some short videos on how to identify the different shafts and such. But your Sonex shaft is going to look very similar to the stock shaft in the way in which, if I can get it to focus, where it rides in the converter seal. the way that that looks, the lockup release hole size, the size most importantly, and the taper into it. It's going to look very similar to a stock shaft, and then the splines are going to be, you know, fully splined into the shaft here, as to where a stock one, it kind of necks up around the splines and then it gets smaller diameter there. If you have a non-Sonex shaft like this TCS Arizona shaft that has seen better days because it has been very hot, you can see that the taper design of the converter sealing ring or converter sealing area is different. This one has a lot more taper on the snout of the input here, as to where that one is a lot less taper. And then most importantly, the lockup release hole, if I can get it to focus, the lockup release hole size is significantly smaller than the lockup release hole size in the Sonex. This is very important on especially anything more than a stock stall. So the more you increase the stall, the more that this small lockup release hole is going to restrict it, and it's actually going to cause converter dragging issues, as where the Sonex style will not have that. So just a little tech tip if you are looking to identify what shaft you have. The other thing too is a Sonex shaft is a one piece, so this hub and shaft is a one piece forged material, as to where this one is going to be a two piece. So your TCS Arizona and your TCS Canada's are both the exact same way. So these technically can still fail here. I've honestly not seen them fail. Typically they just break the shaft, but it can happen. This is actually a true billet material, so this is machined from one piece of billet. This is actually a forged 300M. These have a little bit more elasticity. They'll take a little bit more torsional twist than what a true billet one is, so it's always a Sonex 300M input shaft for me. Behind the input, we have our forward clutches that look great. They always should, so happy to see that. I noticed that this is not a Guerin Belleville spring. This is a late, what they would call a early style. Sorry, late would mean newer. This is an older style Belleville spring. These are commonly used in like 727s and 47 RHs. And if you're going to use a stock Belleville spring, this is actually the best Belleville spring to use. But I like to run all of the Guerin Belleville springs now in everything. So I am going to change that out. And when I do change it out, I'll have to change out the piston, because these old style Belleville springs, you have to run the 840 thousandths tall piston. The 780 will work, but it'll have a ton of slop in there. Not ideal. But you can't run the 840 piston with the Guerin Belleville spring because it's 50% thicker. It's set up to use the 780 earlier style piston. So I will change that out so that way this thing is updated to modern technology. For a little bit of visual reference there, that is the Guerin Belleville spring installed, and that is the early style. You can see a little bit of design difference there. You can see why this is a stronger stock Belleville spring, but it is much thinner than what the Guerin one is. The Guerin one is 50% thicker. That's why it comes with that steel spacer as opposed to the plastic one. And these things hold up awesome. We run these in anything from, now I put them in every build, even the stock builds. But from that all the way up to a 3,300 horsepower proven setup that is in Greg A's truck. So these are really inexpensive and really, really nice upgrades if you guys are building your transmission. Our gear train looks really good here. A little bit of common wear on the thrust washers here, but nothing to be too concerned about. We'll definitely go ahead and replace them while we're in here, get them fresh, but that is very common there, so don't see anything scary here in the gear train. The reverse band looks excellent. You can still read all of the writing on the heavy duty, and the drum looks great as well. Got the pan off here. Filter looks to be pretty good. It's pretty normal amount of clutch material. The bottom of the pan really tells the story. If you have a transmission that is built with GPZ clutches and you see this little bit of gray graphite looking material in the bottom of the pan, that is completely normal. The GPZ clutch is a great holding power clutch, but it sheds a little bit. And so when it sheds, you end up with some material in the pan, especially on the initial, like if it's the first service of your transmission and you're using GPZ clutches, especially if you're using GPZs and Colines, because the Colleen steels are black, it's very common for it to look even much worse than this. So this is what I expect on a common change. Sometimes they're really clean, it just depends, but anything high horsepower, the more power you put through it, the more the clutch is going to shed a little bit. Now, that doesn't mean that the clutch isn't going to last a really long time. It just means that it's shedding a little bit of the graphite material out of it, and it's totally normal. So if you see this in your transmission pan, say you have one of my transmissions, or you have a transmission built with GPZs and Colines, not to be alarmed. Nothing left now to do but to do it. Get her all stripped down and cleaned up, and back together, and we'll talk about it when we get her all done. And just like that, with a snap of a finger, this one is all back together and ready to go. We did this one in an olive drab, also known as OD green, that the customer wanted, which is pretty cool because I like this type of, like military style color stuff. I like the concept of, being prepared to go to war. So pretty cool. Glad that he chose this color. Happy to get this one painted up. Happy to get this one fixed out and ready to go back to the customer in California. So even though this build is over 5 years old, he wasn't the original owner of it. Typically, all the warranty stuff, back then I was doing a 2-year warranty on the workmanship stuff. Nowadays, I don't put a timeline on workmanship because I believe that if you are going to cover workmanship, you should always cover workmanship. And as beautiful as this transmission was inside, and finding those plugs that were loose, learned some stuff over the years, learned how to make some stuff better. So I'm actually not going to charge this customer anything for this refresh. Wasn't really a refresh. Everything was great in it. If the plugs wouldn't have come loose in the pump, would have never been back here. So I'm going to take care of this one for him. This guy's a good customer of mine. This is actually his third Logan built transmission, and like he has all three still. It's not like he bought a truck, sold a truck. Like he has 3 trucks with Logan built transmissions in them. So good customer. Always like to take care of all my customers. So we're going to send this one back out to California so it can go back to whatever fun and shenanigans that he wants to do with it. So thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate it. If you're new here, make sure you click that like button, click that subscribe button, and you can find all of my builds on my website, getloganbuilt.com.